Hi, I'm Mark Davies. In this video, I'll compare what are probably the two most widely used corpora in the world. COCA, the corpus of contemporary American English, and the BNC, the British National Corpus. But first things first, although I believe that both corpora have their comparative strengths and weaknesses, I also believe that both corpora are very useful for teaching, learning, and researching English. In terms of their history, the BNC, which has 100 million words in the 1994 corpus, was created in the late 1980s and early 1990s, and it has many different incarnations. At CQP Web, at Sketch Engine, at EnglishCorpora.org, as well as other sites. In addition to the original BNC, 1994, there's also a BNC 2014, which also has 100 million words, which we'll discuss more in just a minute. Currently, COCA is only available at EnglishCorpora.org, which is probably the most widely used corpus website in the world. COCA, which has 1 billion words, is one of many different corpora at EnglishCorpora.org, including, as mentioned, BNC 1994. In this video, we'll compare COCA and the BNC in terms of three features. First, what genres do they have, such as spoken and academic texts? Number two, the size of the corpora and how that affects the quality of the data. And number three, their usefulness for looking at very recent English and recent changes in English. Before looking at these three issues, however, there's one difference between COCA and the BNC that should be obvious. COCA is a corpus of American English and the BNC is a corpus of British English. So anywhere we might expect to see a difference between these two dialects, it should show up nicely in COCA and the BNC. For example, this spreadsheet shows words that are more frequent in COCA or the BNC, grouped by part of speech. Some differences in the word lists are related to culture, society, politics, or current events. For example, Republican, Congressional, Baseball, and Iraqi in COCA, and Tory, Parliamentary, and Victorian in the BNC. Some are just different words for the same concept, such as store and shop, attorney, solicitor, apartment, flat, or mom and mum. And some words in COCA, which is from 1990 to 2019, refer to things that are too new to have made it into BNC 1994, such as web, internet, high-tech, and online. So anyway, if you're interested in differences between British and American English, the BNC and COCA might be a good way to examine this. And you might also consider other corpora from EnglishCorpora.org that focus on differences between British and American English, as well as other dialects, such as the 1.9 billion word Globe corpus and the TV and movies corpora. And one other introductory note, which has to do with BNC 2014 written. As mentioned, the BNC is composed of 100 million words in BNC 1994 and another 100 million words in BNC 2014. While BNC 1994 is widely available at several online corpus sites, as was mentioned above, BNC 2014 is only available via the LancsBox program, which you install on your own computer. There's a lot of information about the text in BNC 1994. There's also quite a bit of information about BNC 2014 spoken. But there is very little information about BNC 2014 written. With the LanxBox X program, you can't see any files or spreadsheets that provide a list of the 90,000 or so texts in the BNC 2014 written corpus. And we can't even see how many texts or words of data are in the different sections of BNC 2014 written, such as newspapers, finance, or academic medicine. In addition, the LanxBox X program is quite rudimentary. All we can do is see the concordance lines for a given word or phrase. We can't even do collocates, which would allow us to look at the meaning and usage of words and phrases. For example, this is from the manual for LanxBox X. Notice that there is no discussion of collocates there. And this page explicitly mentions that all you can do with LanxBox X is to look for a word and see it in context. You can't do collocates. Some people think that a corpus is only the text in the corpus, that the architecture and interface don't really matter much. But this is a very narrow view of a corpus. This is like saying that a football team is composed of just the players themselves, like the text in a corpus, and that it doesn't matter if they have a coach, or if they've practiced certain plays together, or if they even have a stadium to play in, all of which are like the architecture and interface for the corpus. As mentioned, the BNC 1994 corpus is available from sites like SketchEngine, EnglishCorpora.org, and CQP Web, all of which have a robust architecture and interface. In other words, BNC 1994 is like a football team that also has a coach and plays and a stadium. And COCA also offers an exceptionally wide range of searches and functionality. But BNC written 2014, not so much. At some point, BNC 2014 written might be available via some means other than LanxBox X, or else LanxBox X might be upgraded to become more useful. But until then, we'll limit our discussion of the BNC to the part that is usable and which is widely used by researchers, teachers, and students, BNC 1994. As mentioned, BNC 1994, hereafter called just BNC, has about 100 million words of data, and the BNC, in our estimation, is one of the best corpora ever created in terms of corpus design. About 10% of the corpus, about 10 million words, is spoken, and the other 90%, about 90 million words, is written. You can see in this chart the number of words in the different sections of the BNC. COCA has about 1 billion words of data, about 10 times as large as BNC 1994. It is almost evenly divided between the 8 genres of blog, other web, TV and movie scripts, spoken, fiction, magazines, newspapers, and academic. Some researchers have criticized COCA because it only has these 8 genres. They argue that there are more genres that COCA doesn't have than those that it does. But in my view, that argument doesn't make any sense. Virtually any corpus will have more text types for which there is no data, like Tex-Mex menus, or freeway billboards, or dishwasher repair manuals, or transcripts of visits with chiropractors. That's 4 genres or text types that aren't in COCA. But spoiler alert, they're probably not in the BNC either. When it was first released in 2008, COCA had the same 4 genres as the Longman corpus of English: spoken, fiction, newspaper, and academic, as well as magazines, because we thought that the lexis, words, in magazines was sufficiently different from newspapers and other genres. Later, the genres of blogs and other web pages, as well as TV and movie scripts, were added. But if the original COCA corpus with its 5 genres was so impoverished, then so was the Longman corpus. The bottom line is that these genres represent well the major genres from informal to formal in English. But yes, at some point we might add Tex-Mex menus as well. Y me imagino que a muchos les encantaría que hubiera tales textos. As far as comparing COCA and the BNC, in terms of the genres of fiction, magazines, and newspapers, there's probably not a lot to say. Both corpora do a very good job of including text from a number of subgenres, such as magazines, entertainment, or newspapers, finance. In what follows, we'll focus on 3 other issues where there are bigger differences, or where people have raised questions: blogs and other web pages, spoken, and academic. First, notice that there is little, if any, material from blogs or other web pages in the BNC. This is because the BNC 1994, was created right as the web was becoming a thing in the early 1990s. And then BNC written wasn't updated, and material from the web wasn't included until about 25 years later, the late 2010s, even though it's called BNC 2014. So this is a pretty big difference. The internet is a huge part of people's life, but only COCA has material from the web, blogs and other web pages. In the BNC, it's only in BNC 2014 written, and as we discussed above, as of mid-2023, BNC 2014 written still isn't in a final, really usable form. Second, let's talk about the spoken text. The BNC does a great job with spoken. Lots and lots of well-designed subgenres and great demographic information for the speakers, age, gender, and so on. And something that is really important, BNC 2014 spoken is available online at the CQP website, unlike BNC 2014 written. COCA spoken is not nearly as diverse. All of the texts are taken from unscripted conversation on national and TV radio programs, but we don't really have demographic information for the speakers. In addition, COCA spoken isn't as informal as BNC spoken. About 50% of BNC spoken comes from recordings of everyday conversation. In COCA, as mentioned, it's people talking on national TV and radio about things like politics, sports, entertainment, etc. And people are probably more careful in their speech than in the everyday BNC conversation. Fortunately, the 127 million words of COCA spoken is supplemented by 128 million words from TV and movie scripts. These are a subset of the TV and movies corpora. This is incredibly informal language, and as we've discussed at some length in recent academic publications, such as this one, the language in COCA, TV, and movies, words, phrases, and even grammatical constructions, is actually more informal than the language of BNC spoken. But if you want to compare different subgenres of spoken, or if you want to be able to search by demographic information, such as age, gender, and so on, then you'll definitely want to check out the BNC. Finally, let's talk about academic. The BNC has about 16 million words of academic, and COCA has about 121 million words, about 6 times as large. Both corpora do a nice job of including text from a wide range of subgenres. For example, here are the subgenres in the BNC, and these are the subgenres in COCA. Some researchers have claimed that COCA academic isn't quite as good as BNC academic. They've published books trying to show that several constructions that are representative of academic, such as passives or noun complements or nominalizations, are more frequent in the BNC academic than in COCA academic. But we've shown in lots and lots of detail that their data is just wrong. A careful examination of the data shows that, if anything, COCA academic is, more academic. And this is definitely the case for lexical issues, in other words, words. COCA does a much better job than the BNC in covering the 570 words in the neutral academic word list from Coxhead. You can see the data, including extensive spreadsheets, here. And in terms of phrases, there seems to be some strange skewing in the BNC. For example, a number of the most frequent noun plus noun strings in the BNC refer to very narrow fields of medicine, such as gallbladder, bowel disease, biopsy specimens, acid secretion, bile acid, and plasminogen activator. Say that 10 times real fast. There really isn't lexical skewing like this in COCA. It's much more balanced across different domains of academic English. Researchers who've compared BNC and COCA academic tend not to be overly interested in words. But, words are part of the language too. And this is exactly where COCA academic looks much better than the BNC. But bottom line, the academic in both the BNC and COCA is fine, in spite of the inaccurate findings from some researchers. Back in the late 1980s and early 1990s, a corpus like the BNC with 100 million words was incredibly large. But nowadays, corpora with billions or even tens of billions of words are fairly common, especially at corpus sites like Sketch Engine. But isn't 100 million words enough? Well, in many cases, yes. In others, no, it really does help to have a billion words or more, as with COCA and several other corpora at englishcorpora.org. Let's look at a couple of examples where a large corpus like COCA really does help. First, let's turn to lower frequency syntactic constructions. Consider this phrase, which would give us strings like made her way through the crowd. In the BNC, there are 14 different strings that occur at least 3 times, and there are 5 different verbs represented. Not too bad. This might give us some sense of what verbs can be used here. In COCA, there are 82 different strings. But notice how much more variety we get for the lower frequency strings. It's this richness that is the marker of large corpora. And let's look at the phrase have been being verbed, as in the invasion had been being planned since May. In the BNC, this occurs only 2 times. Although it looks like it might be more frequent in more informal genres, it's really hard to say with only 2 tokens. In COCA, on the other hand, it occurs 41 times. And yes, it looks like it's probably a feature of more informal language. And with 41 tokens, we can start looking at what verbs occur with the construction and other features as well. With only 2 tokens in the BNC, not so much. And what about lexical and semantic phenomena? We chose completely at random 7 nouns that occurred at each of the 4 different frequency levels in English, at about the 12,000th most frequent word, 25,000, 37,000, and 50,000. If you don't believe that these words were chosen completely at random, take a look at this list and select your own words. We then looked at how many noun collocates, nearby words, occurred at least 3 times near these words. If it only occurs once, it might be by chance. 2 times, maybe there's a meaningful relationship. 3 times or more, it probably does mean something. So this is how we set things up. And this is the type of results that we'd get. In this case, we would say that there are 15 noun collocates that occur 3 times or more near toxicity. Here are the results for the nouns near 12,000. Again, the figures show how many nouns with a frequency of at least 3 tokens occur near the node word in the BNC and COCA. For example, as we've seen, there are 15 nouns that occur at least 3 times near toxicity in the BNC and 400 nouns in COCA. Here are some of the nouns in COCA. Notice how much richer the collocates are in COCA. Now let's look at nouns near 25,000. We're not too far down the list. Most adult speakers of English probably have many more than 25,000 words in their active vocabulary. But already with words like anemone, vocalization, and codex, the corpus is starting to run out of meaningful collocates in the BNC. Let's now move down a bit further to number 37,000. Definitely still within the bounds of what a university-educated speaker might know. For example, I knew 6 of the 7 words, but verbena was new to me. There are words like farmyard, where the BNC is still doing okay, and where it almost comes close to COCA. But for more than half of the words, there are either none or only one noun that occurs as a colloquy at least 3 times in the BNC. And what about 50,000? Things are getting sparse for COCA, but COCA is still much better than the BNC, where none of the 7 words have a noun colloquy that occurs at least 3 times. So there is no question that a 1 billion word corpus like COCA provides us with much richer lexical data than the 100 million word BNC. Finally, consider the effect of the number of texts in the corpus. In COCA, there are almost 500,000 texts, 485,179 to be precise. In the BNC, there are just a few more than 4,000 texts, 4,054 to be precise, or less than 1/100th as many texts as in COCA. Suppose that you're creating a virtual corpus in which you create a corpus within a corpus, either based on words or phrases in the corpus, or based on metadata, for example, source, author, or title. And note that you might want to take a look at the video about Virtual Corpora. With just 4,000 or so texts in the BNC, there are many words or phrases where it would probably be hard to find 100 or more texts that meaningfully relate to that word or phrase. But with almost 500,000 texts in COCA, the Virtual Corpora would probably be much better. For example, let's create a virtual corpus for investment in the BNC. Capitalization means that it finds both investment and investments. We take the top 100 texts, give the virtual corpus a name, and then look at the noun keywords from the virtual corpus. Not very impressive. But let's try this again, this time in COCA. I put in investment for the word that we're searching for, find text. These are the top 100 texts that it suggests. I'll call this investment. And now, when I click to see the keywords from this virtual corpus, notice that the keywords are much better quality. In the BNC, 4,000 texts total is just too few for this to work out well. The BNC is not primarily a historical corpus. It's just a snapshot of what British English looked like in 1994 and 2014. However, there have been attempts to compare the two snapshots and to look at change between these two corpora. But there's a serious problem with this approach. There are actually no texts from the 20 years between these two corpora. As a result, it's impossible to map out changes between the early 1990s and 2014. So there's no way to know if a linguistic or cultural or societal shift occurred in 1995 or 2000 or 2005 or 2010. To take a simple example, consider this chart from COCA, which shows the frequency of the word Afghanistan year by year from 1990 to 2019. If we just had a snapshot from 1991 and then again from 2011, 20 years apart, we would see that the word is about 20 times as frequent in 2011. But crucially, when did the word increase in frequency? In COCA, we can see that it was about 2001 when the U.S. invaded Afghanistan. But if, like the BNC, we only had data from 2 time periods, 20 years apart, we'd have no idea when the change happened. In addition, you might miss a huge lexical shift completely. To take a simple example, let's look for the word Y2K, which refers to the computer bug that some people in the late 1990s thought would bring civilization to a halt on January 1st, 2000. This chart shows the frequency in COCA each year from 1990 to 2019. Suppose we just had 2 snapshots of American English from 1995 and 2015. The word Y2K does not appear at all in 1995, and by 2015, it's almost invisible again. Without any data for the 20 years in between, we would almost completely miss this important change in the late 1990s. And you can also see the frequency of related words over time, such as words that have sexual somewhere in the word. So, unlike the BNC, COCA is extremely useful for looking at recent change. It has at least 20 million words of data from each and every year between 1990 and 2019. And crucially, it has essentially the same genre balance each year, so you know that you're comparing apples to apples over time. As you can see, COCA has continuous data from 1990 to 2019, at least 20 million words each year. This is why it's so strange that some people have incorrectly criticized COCA for having, quote, spotty updates, unquote, something that is totally untrue. COCA was updated every 12 to 24 months from 2008, when it was first created, until December 2019, its last update. Compare this to the BNC, where for more than 20 years, there was no update at all for the written part of the corpus, and where for that portion of the corpus, which is 90% of the BNC, we still, as of summer 2023, still really don't know what text it contains or the size or composition of any of the subgenres in BNC 2014 written. And it's not just word and phrase frequency. What about collocates, nearby words, which allow us to look at changes in meaning and usage? The BNC doesn't allow collocate searches for the 2014 data, since LinksBox X, which is the only way to access BNC 2014, can't do collocates. For example, this is from the manual for LinksBox X. Notice that there is no discussion of collocates there. And this page explicitly mentions that all you can do with LinksBox X is to look for a word and see it in context. You can't do collocates. With COCA, on the other hand, you can see collocates over time, such as collocates of crisis. Notice collocates like health for healthcare, debt, energy, and refugee. And you can compare the collocates in different time periods, such as collocates of web in the early 1990s compared to the 2010s. Notice in the early 1990s, collocates like seamless, wrap, untangle, spinning, and so on, whereas on the right for the 2010s, you have words like site, browser, company, design, access, online, and so on. But in terms of language change, it's not just that the BNC can't be used to compare two periods of the language. A more basic and serious issue is that the BNC is just an outdated corpus to begin with. Even in a best case scenario, we will be using data that stops in 2014. But that assumes that we're able to get the data from BNC 2014 written in the first place. We've already seen that with lengths box X, we can't do collocates, and that we are just limited to the frequency of words and phrases. And even here, we just don't know what is in BNC 2014 written, since a listing of all of the text has never been made public, as it has been for COCA since the day that COCA was first released, and for every update since then. And if we do limit ourselves to 1994, where we do have good documentation, then we are dealing with a corpus that is now a full generation out of date. Think of everything that has happened since 1994. It just won't be there. In just the field of technology, this would include the internet, blogs, social media, cell phones, texting, and much, much more. In conclusion, we've seen that both COCA and the BNC cover well the major genres from informal, for example, spoken or TV and movie scripts, to formal, for example, academic. The BNC has more subgenres of spoken and greater demographic information for the conversational text, while the language in the TV and movie scripts in COCA is as informal as BNC spoken, both in terms of lexis, words, and grammar. Some people, as we've seen, have suggested that BNC academic is more academic than COCA academic, but as we've seen, these studies are flawed. If anything, it is COCA academic that is more academic, both in terms of lexis and grammar. But I feel that both corpora have very robust academic sections. Finally, only COCA has text from blogs and other web pages, which can be accessed via a robust corpus architecture and interface. In terms of size, at 1 billion words, COCA is about 5 to 10 times as large as the BNC, depending on what version of the BNC you're using. This has implications for lower frequency syntactic constructions, but especially for lexically and semantically oriented searches, such as collocates. And because COCA has more than 100 times as many texts as BNC 1994, it is much easier to create virtual corpora to focus on just a subset of the text. For example, those dealing with a topic like astronomy or investments or heart disease. Finally, the BNC is very limited as a historical corpus, and its texts are not as recent as in COCA. In COCA, we can see the frequency of words and phrases year by year from 1990 to 2019. something that would be completely impossible in the BNC. In addition, we can see the collocates of a word or phrase over time, such as these collocates of crisis, which allows us to look at changes in meaning and usage. Because LinksBox X has a limited interface and architecture, this would be completely impossible with BNC 2014 written. One final note, some corpora, like the LANA corpus that is currently being created, are explicitly modeled on the BNC. To the extent that the BNC has strengths, and we believe that it does have many strengths, then this new corpus should have those same strengths as well. But if a corpus in 2023 or 2024 decides to go with the relatively small size of 100 million words, which is apparently what LANA is going to do, which was common 20 to 30 years ago, then it will probably have the same limitations as the BNC. And if the creators design the corpus to just be a snapshot at a particular point in time, then the corpus will probably not be useful for looking at changes in the language. But bottom line, for many types of research, both COCA and the BNC will provide you with rich, insightful data. And anyone who says differently hasn't really used both corpora enough to know. Sometimes it's nice to just step away from ivory tower approaches to corpora and see what actual researchers, teachers, and students find the most useful. And tens of thousands of people can attest that both COCA and the BNC can be very helpful for research, teaching, and learning English.